Hey everybody, Joe Brady here, and I want to talk today about what do you do when you get a new camera. I just got a new camera, now what? Photography can be a rewarding activity that brings a lot of pleasure and joy. The right camera can be an extension of both your vision and your imagination, but it can also be a source of frustration when you don't know how to control it. One of the first things to do is to learn your camera well enough so that it doesn't get in the way of you capturing great photos. When you have a new camera, regardless of your experience level, there are going to be settings, buttons, and capabilities that are new to you. Unless you devote weeks of all your waking hours to poring over the manual, it's going to take some time and practice to master all of the capabilities that your camera has in order for you to get the best results with your style of photography. I just started testing out the new OM1 Micro Four Thirds mirrorless camera, and while I've only had it for 2 days, I'm starting to get the hang of it, while also realizing I'm only scratching the surface of its capabilities. By the way, after these 2 days, I am already excited by this camera system. I'll be back to you later with updates and take it on some wonderful trips. But anyway, let's get back to it. So here's how I approached getting started with this new camera. Now, after unboxing, mounting a lens, getting a battery charged, and putting a memory card in the camera, the first step was to examine the camera body to see what was familiar and what was a mystery. Now let's go ahead and do this. Let's go ahead and put a lens on here, standard camera body mount or body cap, lens cap, line up the red dots on the front of the body. There's the camera on. I'll take off the lens cap, put the lens hood on, good. I've already got a battery in it that's down here, and I've already put a card in it that's right here. In fact, where's my other card? Here's my other card. Take my other card. This camera actually has 2 card slots, so I've got 2 cards. I've got a battery. I now have a lens mounted on here. So now the camera is comfortable. It's in my hand. And that was one of the first things I noticed about this camera when I was looking at it. It is so comfortable in your hand, and that's an important consideration when you're picking a camera. So as I take a look at the camera body, there's a lot of familiar stuff on here. This lens has a PASM dial. We'll talk about that in a minute. There's menu buttons, info buttons, all of the standard stuff that you're going to see on the back of any mirrorless camera. If any of these operations are new to you, look in the camera's manual, which is usually online, and look for a Getting Started section. This will familiarize you with the physical attributes of how everything goes together. The next step is to take a closer look at the layout of the camera. Now, if you don't want to wear glasses when looking through the camera viewfinder, there's a little diopter adjustment just to the one side of the viewfinder. This allows you to focus the electronic viewfinder, or EVF, screen with your eyesight. With the camera on and with a scene in front of you, I'll just point it in front of me. By the way, when you hear that little beep, that means the camera's in focus. Then look through the viewfinder and spin the dial until everything looks sharp, and now the viewfinder is set for your eyes. Now, after becoming familiar with the physical basics of the camera, there are a couple of menu items that you're going to want to know. First, where is the setting to format your memory card? When you format the card, everything on the card is deleted, so make sure you already have anything on it already downloaded. I always find it a good idea to format any memory card when it's going into a new camera, particularly if it's a different brand than the camera that last used it. The next thing I would take a look at is look in the menu system for the monitor and EVF, the electronic viewfinder, the brightness settings for that. These are often set too bright, and you can get fooled by seeing the image as nice and bright on the screen and through the viewfinder, but then when you take the picture, it's actually dark. Why? Because you actually have the screen set too bright. It's not reflecting reality. And until you master the use of the histogram, a subject for another day, if you're going to rely on the monitor and the EVF for making exposure adjustments judged on what you see there, you got to make sure that they are set in the middle, again, particularly through the electronic viewfinder. Next, I would set the highlight and shadow warnings. The highlights are actually the most important part to protect. When you're using a new camera, turning on the highlight warnings, sometimes known as the blinkies, is a handy indicator to help protect you from losing all the details and highlights. When an area is overexposed, the camera will show you those spots in red or flash white. They each use different signals to let you know something's blowing out. Some cameras have a highlight warning, just a simple on-off button. Some cameras like this OM1 actually let you set how close to pure white you're going to have to get before the warning comes on. Again, if this is new to you, go with the defaults. Another really handy item is the self-timer. If you're going to shoot longer exposures on a tripod and/or if you want to set the camera up so that you can get back into a group shot, knowing how to set your camera's timer is really handy. Setting it for 2 seconds is great for long exposures because then the camera's had a chance to settle down and it's not going to be shaking from you touching it. For getting yourself back into the shot, I find 10 or 12 seconds nice for getting back into the frame so that you can be in the picture too. So let's talk about some of the buttons and dials. Again, there's some things that are pretty much the same on all cameras. Most cameras have a PASM dial and an assortment of buttons and dials and sometimes a joystick, some labeled and some not. When the button has no label, that usually means that it's waiting for you to go in and decide what it's going to do. So you'll have to go into the menu to assign functions. In fact, today's cameras often let you change many of the dials and buttons and assign different features to them, but that's something we'll get into later. So where do you find out how to set all of these buttons and options? You got to read the manual. Now, do I mean read the entire manual? Certainly not in one sitting. This camera's manual is 341 pages, and like most of today's cameras, it covers a lot of operations and characteristics that I will infrequently, if ever, use. But in the meantime, I have specific needs for my camera for my type of photography. And those are the things that I will actually take the time to look up. For mirrorless cameras, the first thing I recommend you do is to make sure that the display is showing you what is called live view, which means it is showing you the effects of the current settings on the camera. So when you look through the viewfinder, it will look how the shot's going to look. So if it's dark or light, you can make adjustments before you actually take the shot. There are also certain settings that I personally don't use because they don't apply to my photography. One, for example, is called Auto ISO, where the camera chooses the sensor's sensitivity to light. I prefer to have full control over ISO, so that is one of the first things I turn off. Now, if you're new to photography and you're going to start out using the full program mode on the camera, you can leave it alone. But if you ever want to shoot in full manual, I highly recommend turning off Auto ISO, or it may wreak havoc with your exposures. By the way, if you're going to use any of the auto modes, and that includes program, aperture, and shutter priority, you also need how to learn to use the exposure compensation settings. This lets you make changes to the exposure even in the auto modes, darker or lighter. Let's say, for example, you've got somebody in their backlit, the sun or light is behind them and their face is very dark. With exposure compensation, you can increase the exposure until the face looks correctly exposed. With a manual that is over 300 pages long, there are, of course, many more settings and capabilities that are new to me. That's why you have to take the camera to hand and get out there and shoot some pictures. As you're shooting, you'll no doubt realize there are settings you can't find and controls that are set wrong for you. Slow down, refer to the manual, and figure it out. These cameras are incredibly customizable so that you can often assign all the features important to you to buttons that make sense. Before long, the camera will become familiar enough to you that you can know the exposure will be the best possible under any conditions. When that happens, your new camera will become a comfortable friend and a true extension of your vision and your creativity. As always, there is more to explore, so I'll be back to you again soon. I'm Joe Brady, thanks for watching, and I wish you a great week ahead. Bye-bye.